We'll settle down a bit and we'll try to get started on time. All right, let's call the meeting to order. And the first bill for our consideration is House Bill 5, Voter Registry List Voter ID and Absentee Ballots. So everybody, this is a committee bill, product of your interim work. So Senator Scott would certainly remember it, and Senator Boner. I don't know if we have anybody defines what the an act relating to elections, amending the definition of the registry list to include voter identification numbers, absentee ballot status, and registration dates, making conforming amendments and providing for an effective date. I believe that we have Ms. Freese from Fremont County that we could maybe representing the Clerks Association. Senator Scott, do you remember much about this bill, Senator Boner? I remember it had to do with the being able to get a list of the absentee ballots that have gone out and back, and that's, as you recall, candidates like to use the absentee ballot request to send or reach out to those voters. And okay, Ms. Freese is online. Ms. Freese, how about bailing us out? We're floundering around in House Bill land today.
Okay. So this first bill is House Bill 5, correct?
Correct.
This was one by the Corporations Committee that, as I recall, it just made sure that it included what is actually on the registry list, which is the unique identifying numbers by the state and information relating to absentee ballot status and registration dates. Those are all actually on our list, and we wanted to codify there. Under page 2D, this area does talk about what is public record and what is not.
Right.
So the things that it added here is that unique identifying number is not public record and that we should keep it confidential. And then on page 223108, again, the list shall contain these things, again, that the unique identifying number, the absentee ballot status, registration status, and that's basically, seriously, all it's doing is doing what we actually have on our lists. I don't know if it fixes the absentee ballot getting the list from us. I know we did. I think most of the county clerks, if they did this from their locations, the absentee ballot list, we did give information. We just did not give the address to where the ballot actually went, especially if they had gone out of state. We gave the information that they were absentee and that their home address was this. So that's what we currently are doing. I don't know if it changes that any, because it's still confidential, the unique identifying number, so we can't give that out.
Ms. Freese, we got questions as we go along here. Senator Scott.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, my reading on this is that it does make the absentee ballot status clearly public record that you can give out. Is that your reading of it?
Ms. Freese?
So it says that on our list, it does give information about absentee ballot status.
Yeah.
And it does not say that it is confidential. So I would say we could give out absentee ballot information, status at least.
So that would be the status is whether they've returned it or not? Is that what we're talking about?
Right. Sent, I think the terminology is sent, received, and there's another word, prepared. So it's been prepared as the first step, sent as a second step, and then received as a third step. And that's really important, obviously, at the polls, because we can't let people vote if they're in any of those three statuses. If it's already been prepared and sent, then they have to call the clerk's office and make sure we haven't received them. And if it was already received, obviously, then they can't vote. Just so you know what's on that list.
Gotcha. Senator Scott, you okay?
Mr. Chairman, so again, I'm trying to nail it down for sure. Somebody requests an absentee ballot. Will you or will you not honor a request for that information?
Ms. Freeze.
Matt, thank you. Mr. Chairman, Senator Scott, are you saying if somebody asks for the list of absentee ballot people?
Yeah.
Okay. So if they ask for that information, the only things I cannot give out are under the confidential area, which include name, gender, or besides that, excuse me, let me get the right one, social security, phone numbers, driver's license, date of birth, telephone numbers, travel ID numbers, emails, and other personally identifiable information, which now includes the unique identifying numbers. I think what was happening, and we'd have to, so what the way the Public Records Act is that if it's something that we already give out, it's a report we already give out and we don't have to design one. Our report that we were giving out did have the unique identifying numbers on them. Mm-hmm. So in essence, if that's the report we have now, we would not be able to give that out to you because it has that unique identifying number on it, as I recall.
So, Clerk Freese, I think we're trying to figure out, I think we understand what you can't give out. What can you give out?
So we can give out a name,
Yep.
address where they reside,
Yes.
and mailing address, party affiliation.
And whether or not they've returned the status.
We should be able to say the status, yes. I think the piece that we cannot do is this unique identifying number. Right. Yeah.
So,
I mean, and as clerks, I mean, this is what I'm going to say. As clerks, I know we went away a little bit from what the Secretary of State was doing because people had received these. So I'm going to go out on a limb here and say we can probably design another report that we can give that out, making sure we don't give out the identifying number.
Okay. Let's see if any other committee members have questions for Clerk Freese. Anybody else? I do. Senator Landon.
So good morning, Clerk Freese. Thanks for joining us this morning. So really, if I read this bill correctly, it sounds like we're codifying what's already there, what we've already been doing, except that we are including under 22.2.113 that these unique identifying numbers shall not be public records. Am I reading that correctly?
Ms. Freese?
That's how I read it as well, is that we're putting in there what we do have on the list and what is not public record, which has been a little bit of a sticking point when the Secretary of State got information from AG's office.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Down looking the other way on the committee, Senator Boner.
Hey, Mr. Chairman, I have to admit, I'm reading the bill a little bit differently and looking at page 3, line 2. I mean, you have, it looks to me like the bill would make unique identifying numbers shared by the state a public record, right along names, gender, address, and party affiliations.
Yeah.
So I think
I'm reading that the same way too.
Okay, so I'm a little confused with the testimony. It seems like what this bill does is it makes those identifying numbers public. So I just want to make sure that we're.
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry. When I read it the way he read it, I agree. Sorry.
All right, we all agree. It is like Monday morning here, except for it's Tuesday, but okay. Well, let's hear from the Secretary of State's office. Secretary's here with his staff, and let's see what they have. Good morning, Mr. Secretary. How are you?
Mr. Chairman. the Wyoming Secretary of State, Chuck Gray, and then to my left is Jesse Naaman, our Chief Deputy. We support this bill. I think maybe we can help a little bit with the history on this bill. This bill includes within the definition of registry list unique identifying numbers generated by the state, as well as information relating to absentee ballot requests and returns. So it deals with two different things. You've got this unique identifying number, which was a requirement of HAVA, that everybody, when they initiate a registration, is given this unique identifying number, and then you have the absentee ballot status request. That's the two things that this bill is dealing with. And it puts into the list of makes it clear that their information that can be released. Because in statute, there's two lists. There's a list of things that shall be released, and then there's a list of things that shall not be released. And one of those things that shall not be released is this vague term, personally identifiable information, which is a very debatable term and led to the Secretary of State's office last year coming to the conclusion that these two things should not be released after about 2 decades of practice of them being released. Right. So this bill is an attempt to codify that they shall be released in reaction to the Secretary of State's ruling last year, which goes against 2 decades of practice. Now, for the record, one of the first things I did when entering office was initiate a review of this, and we've come to a very different conclusion. In 2009, the Wyoming State Legislature passed a bill clearly removing the voter ID number from the list of information that is not to be released. It was Session Laws, Chapter 100, adopted March 2nd, 2009. I don't have the bill number. It was from 2009. And they removed the voter ID number from the list of things not to be released. In our opinion, that coupled with 2 decades of practice in the Wyoming Secretary of State's office, the intent of the legislature, which we think is pretty clear, we began releasing this data after a letter that was written to me from our general counsel. We began doing that last month. At the same time, we like the statutory guidance, but we came to a different legal conclusion, but we like the clarity that this bill provides. So this is basically, and the clerks were doing it anyway with the absentee status, and this codifies existing practice from both the clerks and the Wyoming Secretary of State, current one.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Secretary. Questions for Mr. Secretary? Senator Scott and then Senator Landon.
Mr. Chairman, as I read page 3, line 2, it puts the unique identifying numbers in the list of things that are not public records, that new language there. And my question is, what harm would we do if we removed that and left them down here on page 3, line 16, 17? I think that would have the effect of making those unique identifying numbers public record. And since they're only used for voting purposes, I can't see what harm that does, Mr. Chairman, because the other things are things that people might misuse. But that one, I don't see that they would. So my question is, if we were to do that, would that be a good thing to do?
Mr. Secretary.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Scott, that's, I think you're right that the language in 22.2.113 conflicts with what happens in 22.3.108. Maybe that's some of the confusion. I don't know if that was an amendment because I don't recall that being in the original version, but.
Senator Bonner is on that point, I think.
And I think this language is confusing. I'd point to page 3, line 1. It says other than names, gender, and you.
Oh, yeah.
And so it's sort of like a double negative. And
Yeah,
and so
it is. Yeah.
It's not the best worded statute, and that it took me about 10 minutes staring at it to
Thank you,
understand
Senator Bonner.
what's public and what's not. But it helps just, it's right there in between address and party affiliation. We know that's public already, right? And that's, there you go.
Mr. Chairman, I think
Back
we've
to you, sir.
identified why there was so much confusion a moment ago. Yeah, that is, but that, I agree.
So it's my
That's in
theory
line.
that it's a Monday on a Tuesday.
Yeah.
You know. Senator Landon.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And Mr. Secretary, I guess the first question would be, why do we need to release these personally identifiable numbers? And do you have any concerns about the privacy of the vote? I mean, are we creeping out toward the edge of the cliff where we run any of those kind of risks? In the situation, the way that the statute is now, if I request a absentee ballot or whatever, you're going to literally have just about everything you need to know about me. Is that not correct? Or maybe you can help me know why we need to throw that personally identifiable number out there into the world.
Mr. Secretary.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Landon, well, as you know, and I've found this, people say 80% of the things you can agree on, and I've found that usually there's 80% that there's tension on, and those are the difficult decisions in this legislature, and there's always tension. And I think this is one of them, that transparency versus privacy. But I can tell you in the election, people that request these records, these voter ID numbers are very important in terms of identifying whether people are double voting, whether there are duplicate registrations, because this number follows you no matter what jurisdiction you go to. And in HAVA, this was one of the changes that sort of secured the vote, was having this number that ensured that if you crossed another jurisdiction, especially another state, that this number would still go with you. And I think the intent of the legislature in 2009 in removing it was pretty clear from the list of info that is not to be released, that they went on the side of transparency linked to security. And so I think the intent of the legislature right now is pretty clear. On the absentee status, Adam, I'd say, with 30% of people voting absentee, I certainly don't think the way the current statute reads that it's personally identifiable, because you've got such a huge part of the population voting absentee. So I always lean towards that transparency and that security in many of these situations. I don't think this one crosses the line. I mean, if you were to release birth date, then that's a whole other thing. I mean, the full birth date, that's a whole other deal.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Secretary. I think that's the push, privacy versus transparency, and appreciate that. Helps me get there. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Landon. Anybody else down here? Senator Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And maybe this should have been for Ms. Freeze, but maybe the Secretary can answer this or his office. So I'm looking at the bill is introduced, and then there was a standing committee in the House. Standing committee in the House spoke to requests and returns to do with the absentee ballots. That's been changed to status. When Ms. Freeze testified, she said there was actually 3 statuses. And what I guess my question is where is the status actually in statute, so that we actually understand what that absentee status means in context to what a public record may be? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Barlow, that was a change requested by the clerks. You seem to be liking the earlier language. I would agree with you on that. I like the original language. I was going to ask them to me, it's basically gets us to the same place. I liked the original language. I think it was clear, but I think if you go back and listen to the meeting, the feeling was it's basically the same thing, but I like the earlier language.
Anybody else? Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Anybody else like to testify on this bill? Yes, ma'am, over there. Go ahead, please.
Sorry.
Green light.
Thank you, Chairman Case, members of the committee. My name is Kathy Russell. I am the Executive Director of the Wyoming Republican Party. I am also a past chairman of a county party and served with good Senator Boner. I wanted to emphasize a couple of things. Number one, that election security and election integrity is very important to the Wyoming Republican Party and all Republicans and basically all voters. And I would like to, I think I'm safe in saying that we support Secretary of State's comments that this bill has some good points in it. From a practical standpoint of people who use the data and have to receive permission to get the data, and that is outlined in statute, that unique identifier was there specifically to provide anonymity in the original bill on the federal level. On the state level, it helps us separate, if you're a county chairman and you're receiving these roles, or you're a candidate, or you're whoever is qualified to receive this information, it's critical to have that. And I want to make sure that that doesn't go away. It is absolutely not uncommon to find two voters with the same name. And so, and even in the same household, a nephew, a son, a daughter, those kinds of things are very common. And so what I, as a county chairman, was doing was relying on the unique identifier to differentiate, assuming that the county clerk, where they were registered, had done their due diligence and affirmed that there were two different people registering. And so that unique identifier is a very critical piece of election security. Do we have two people registered under the same name? In terms of the absentee ballots, there's lots of issues that we've read about with absentee ballots, and it's not that an absentee ballot in itself is bad, it's that we assure that any person who's getting it requested it, and each person is only getting one. And again, that unique identifier is critical, and I can't imagine that this wouldn't also be important in the county clerk's office. And I can tell you from personal experience that some of the things that are listed as being a unique identifier when you register, for example, the address, is not always verified by the county clerk. I had a certified list of people who had won positions as precinct committee men and women come to me certified as winning on the primary ballot. And when I went to check on a person, I lived in a small town and we knew pretty much everybody. And not only could I not find the person, despite every effort I could make to find this person, there's no way they were living at the address that was listed. And so clerks just don't have the time to go out and verify each of them. So it's often county party people who do verify it, or people who are walking for a candidate. And so that unique identifier also provides a check back. It is anonymous, and so I would just urge that you keep those things in mind as you work through this bill.
Thank you,
Thank
Ms.
you.
Russell. Questions for Ms. Russell? Anybody? Thank you, ma'am. Next, Ms. Simmons?
Gail Simmons, Civics 307. And I want to say I'm really happy that I can say I agree with what the Secretary of State said. I think that one of the problems here, and I do a lot of data evaluation, and the loss of the ability to get that unique voter ID makes it near impossible to do any kind of evaluation. So when I'm giving you information on crossover voting, and the ones that do change and change back, I'm actually tying together the voter ID from a series of records of reports that I've received from the Secretary of State's office. So that unique voter ID is really, really critical. I think the problem on page 3, as was pointed out, is kind of the double negative that's on there. So it takes all these things that are confidential and then says, except these, and then it finishes with, are confidential and can't be replaced. So I would make a recommendation that what might make it cleaner is on page 3, line 1, after personally identifiable information, jump down to 3, are not public records and shall be kept confidential. So that instead of that clause in between, you're just flat out saying, you can't provide this information. And then the ones that you can, so then get rid of other than, because it's no longer necessary. Then names, gender, addresses, unique identifying numbers generated by the state, and party affiliations are public records. And then what you've done is you've taken a very complex, kind of convoluted sentence and broken it into 2 and said, these things are confidential and these things are not. The other thing is I want to, there are other records beside these. So for example, I pulled on a Freedom of Information Act, the voter history file. And I really want to thank the Secretary of State's office, specifically Mr. Rubino, who gave like rapid response, which is pretty amazing given that I believe that the entire elections section over there is vacant. So they're being very responsive. There is still some questions. So when I received that file, it did not have precincts, which are identified later on in this, nor any of the districts, so House districts and municipalities. So the other thing that might be added here on page 3, line 2, in addition to those things that are not confidential, names, gender, addresses, also include the districts, like political districts. So it would be, special districts, municipalities, House districts, those kind of things, just so that it's clear for their sake, because they're all in an abundance of caution, making sure that they're not messing things up. And that's it. I stand for questions.
Thank you very much. Questions from Ms. Simmons. Senator Landon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So Ms. Simmons, I'll ask you the same question I asked the Secretary. Do you have any concerns about these personal identifiable numbers that are going out there with names? Are we okay with that? I mean, is there any danger at all of those numbers getting in the wrong hands and going somewhere else?
Ms. Simmons.
Through you, Chairman, Senator Landon, absolutely not. These voter IDs that are assigned as unique identifiers within WIO-Reg absolutely serve zero other purpose than to say this is the unique person who has registered and can vote with that other non-confidential information. So the address says that, ties into a precinct. It allows us, for example, when somebody gets married and they no longer have the same last name, it's still the same person. They move from one county to another county, it's still the same person. It gives no information about how they voted or anything else that would be protected under the privacy of exercising our franchise.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? Anybody else? Thank you, Ms. Simmons. You've actually probably been to all the hearings on this, so appreciate your perspectives.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Who else would like to address the committee? Anybody else? Is there anybody online, Kelly? No. Mr. Secretary, if I might throw one at you. suggestion of breaking that up into 2 sentences, do you think that's a good one? Sir?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I get a little nervous making changes in the second, so I have a lot of respect for the second house, but making changes at the very end, just want to make sure we get it right. I think I understood what you was saying, but it's your call whether we want to go down that route. I'll double check it once we get the amendment.
Okay.
I would caution, we'll look at what we did on those requests was the intent was that we released what the previous secretary released plus the voter ID number and the absentee status, because that was a reversal. So we'll look at those other, that precinct issue. And in the past, I believe that's always been added on there. I would caution on making this list so voluminous. I think the personally identifiable thing is where there's some discretion. And once you make it so voluminous that, it's just, why is that there then? If the list is going to be exhaustive. So I would caution on that.
All right. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Senator Landon, then Senator Scott.
I just wanted to go back to the fact that the Secretary did say that he respected the second house. Did you hear that? I just wanted to get that in.
We got that on the record, I'm pretty sure, and we respect him, so. Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, with the secretary here and available to comment, I'd like to propose a potential amendment and get his comments on it that would split it into 2 sentences.
Okay, let's hear it.
Mr. Chairman, you would start on page 2, delete the words "and other personally identifiable information." You delete all of line 1 and all of line 3 and line 4 through confidential. And then you'd insert a new sentence that said, gender, addresses, precinct, and voter and voting district, unique identifying number generated by state and party affiliation are not public records and shall be, you don't, just say are not public records. And then you could add another sentence that said personally identifiable information not listed in this subsection are not public records. Just as a catch-all, or you could say we don't really need that catch-all.
Senator Scott, I'm pushing back a little bit. That's a very long sentence with a very long list of a lot of things.
Yeah, but it's,
we don't want to give out. That could be used for identity theft and all sorts of things. But did you take out the words "shall be kept confidential"?
no, those things.
Okay, I think I didn't track
Yeah, and I
you
may
very
have,
well. Okay.
misspoken.
Yeah, because all of that clearly,
Those things should be confidential.
yeah.
And then the other things we'll say are not public records.
Yeah, and I think that's what Ms. Simmons was getting at too.
Yeah.
So it's going to take a little bit more digging in there, I think. But Ms. Secretary, that's the idea.
Well, Mr. Chairman, as long as, I guess, I tracked it in. I think it's okay. I guess there's a lot of data columns. And so, as long as that personally identifiable information is a separate sentence, but I like it then if we're breaking it out to say that it's not necessarily exclusive. That's one thing I get nervous about once you start listing so many things. I think the beauty of the statute is that it said, look, there's a lot of data, here. There's a lot of columns, And personally identifiable information is not to be released. Here's some things that are to be released, but I think it's pretty clear when it's not a long list that it's not exclusive. And I would just be careful on making it so specific. That's my one caution. But I think it's okay to go ahead and break it out, be clear. But I at the same time, you know, we're getting pretty close to the end, so I do think it does read okay, but I get you want to make it clear, so.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Let's hear from Ms. Freese. I know she's trying to get back in and probably got an opinion about this, and Ms. Langford's here too. So Ms. Freese, we go to you.
Mr. Chairman, so I apologize. It does feel like a Monday on a Tuesday. Okay, so I think I've got my bearings about me. First of all, I wanted to answer Senator Barlow's question. Status is really important for the county clerks to have those 3 types of statuses. I can't write at my fingertips find anything like that in the election code, but we don't want to just say we have received an application for and sent that out. We don't want those 2. We want all 3 statuses. So if we could have that we asked for, that is already in this bill. The second thing that you've asked, or actually Senator Landon asked several times, and I'm only going by hearsay. I did go out and I'm not smart enough to Google how you do this, but my understanding is that there are plenty of apps out there now for your phone or whatever to crack barcodes. So if you actually can do that, then people who get these lists who have the barcode may be able to crack that code. So I'm just telling you what I have heard, and I forgot to mention that to you. On the amendment, I do like the idea of what Ms. Simmons said, but to stop after, so page 3, line 1, go ahead and say after information, then go down and pick up from line 3, are not public records and shall be kept confidential, and get rid of everything else, because then that means anything for anybody in there is public record. And then you're not worrying about leaving out something. And that is hard on us when we're trying to be so sure that we're only giving out what we're supposed to. So only tell us what we can't give out.
So thank you, Clerk Freese. So you would not add a list that are public records. You would just, after on line 1, personally identifiable information, and you'd continue the sentence from line 3, are not public records and shall be confidential. And you would not insert as an opposite sentence that says these things are public records. So if that's where you're coming out on this.
Correct, because Chairman, I do believe that the statute has identified already what is confidential for us. There's nothing new in the list right now.
Thank you, Clerk Freese. That might be the easiest. Everybody, let's think about that. Ms. Langford, you're new to the game. Not really, but did you want to add anything? Ms. Freese did cover for the clerks and everything. Okay, please. Ms. Langford.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Senators. I'm Mary Langford, and I have the honor of representing the County Clerks Association. I have just 2 short comments. The purpose of this bill is policy change. However, we want it as clear as we possibly can get it, so there isn't any wiggle room or any need to guess what is going to be confidential, what is public record, and that's how we got to this place already. And I believe that Ms. Freese's recommended amendment fixes that, and it doesn't require more sentences or more lists. It could very well be taken care of with just that inclusion and then omitting the rest of that section on page 3. The other thing is in reference, Mr. Chairman, to Senator Barlow's question about status. There's 3 things that happen there. An absentee ballot is sent out, it's in process, and it's returned. There isn't anything, we don't have really anything that talks about returns necessarily. We want to be able to just provide the status of that absentee ballot. So that's the reason why status, as opposed to the language that's there with return requests and returns.
We good? Thank you, Ms. Langford. Just a second, Mr. Secretary. And then Ms. Langford, the status this status thing is clear to everybody. It's not something we have to define in rules that there are 3 levels of, nothing like that, right? It's very clear to you.
Mr. Chairman, yes, it is. It's clearer than requests and returns.
Okay, Ms. Secretary.
Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to weigh in. I like Ms. Freese's amendment. I think that
too.
gets us there.
Thank you, Ms. Secretary. Ms. Simmons, can you nod your head? You like it? We got a thumbs up from the back. All right, is there anybody else online that'd like to testify? Anybody else in the room? Anybody else in the room? Senator Barlow?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So my question is, if we are,
I'm not hearing you very well. You gotta get
my
closer.
question is, if we're confident about there's no buzzing today in this room.
The air's not on. It'll probably defy us before we're done.
If we're confident with the verify, or the new number, or this not new number, unique identifying number, why do we actually even want to collect anything else? Driver's license numbers, tribal ID card numbers, social security numbers, partials, et cetera. I'm curious, Mr. Chairman.
Now, hold on, Senator Barlow. So the unique identifying number is assigned by the clerks or by the system or to the voter registration person. We need those other numbers to because when you actually register to vote, it's a very rigorous process and you have to prove who you are. And so all of these things are used to prove who you are in that. So they have records of that. And then we have a little lesser standard for the ID that you show at the poll. It's not quite as rigorous. It just kind of proves that you're the person that's registered. So but they assign the unique identifying number to the voter so they don't have to carry the rest of all that other stuff around. And indeed, it can make it more public, that piece of it. So this is all part of establishing your identity, all of these, and that you are that voter. How'd I do? Ms. Russell, did you want to weigh in?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To address your issue that you just brought up, Senator Barlow, my sister is an election judge and election supervisor in Maricopa County. In this last election, they had 5 cases at their location out of 1,200 voters of stolen IDs. And so what caught the stolen ID situation was the unique identifier. They had stolen pretty much everything, including the driver's license. And so the unique identifier was what caught the illegal activity.
There you go.
So, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Russell. All right, committee, I'm not seeing any more testimony on the bill. What's your pleasure? Motion by Boner. Discussion. Any amendments? Senator Boner.
Mr. Chairman, I move we strike on page 3, line 1, after information, all of line 2, and on line 3 up to party affiliations, as suggested by the Fremont County Clerk.
There you go. So now it reads, email addresses and other personal identifiable information are not public records and shall be kept confidential. Everybody's on the same page? No. Senator Scott.
Chairman, if we do it that way, then you could very well construe that the other personally identifiable information catches gender, address, unique identifying number, party affiliations, and makes all that confidential. I don't think if you do it with just one sentence, I think you've got to remove that and other personally identifiable information.
Okay, thank you, Senator Scott. Let's throw that back out there and reach you on it. Because I think Senator Scott's point is that other personally identifiable information is a pretty big thing. And unless it's qualified, it's too much. That's why he gets the big bucks. He gets paid more than all of us. Actually, he gets paid the same. Good job, Senator Scott. Ms. Freese, you see what Senator Scott's picked up? She's still there. I know she's there.
Sorry, I was out of the room, I guess. Yeah, I think that works.
Well, Ms. Freese, I think Senator Scott, let me explain something to you.
Okay.
He's caught something here. We have a long list, and the last thing on the list is "and other personally identifiable information." And we're proposing to end that with that and say "are not public records and shall be kept confidential." But Senator Scott's point is that the other personally identifiable information is a very broad catch and could potentially include things like addresses, names, gender, unique identifying number. I mean, you could say that those are other personally identifying information. So that while we're trying to fix this by simplifying it, it doesn't quite do what we thought the first round. Back to you, Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, if you want to just list the things that are private, you've got to remove that catch-all unless you list the things that are not to be kept confidential. So if you want the catch-all, you've got to list the other things.
I agree. Senator Bonner, do you see that?
Yes, I do. And so perhaps I'd propose
Go ahead.
amending my amendment by, on page 3, line 4, adding names, gender, addresses, unique identifying numbers generated by the state, and party affiliations are public records. So we just,
That goes back to Ms. Simmons.
so we retain the current language, but we make a more clear distinction.
Okay, I think that's a fair alternative.
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Scott,
if we use that alternative, I suggest we add precinct and voting district to that list that are public information.
that's fair enough. I think that would work. Can we try just Barry, what happens if we just, in the deletion, also delete "and other personally identifiable information"? And so it's the list, identification card numbers, email addresses are not public records and shall be kept confidential. Does that work? I'm not trying to supersede your motion. I'm just trying to,
No, Mr. Chairman, then you don't need the language on,
your mic's not on, sir.
my apologies, Mr. Chairman, but that way you don't need 2, 3, and 4. You can strike that language. That's kind of what I thought we could do, is just delete those final 2 words on page 2. Line 1, go to shall not be kept confidential. So I'm kind of with you there. I think that's a lot cleaner and easier, but
It's kind of two forks in the road, so I'm anxious to see.
Well, Mr. Chair, I think the motion should stand as it is. We can vote on it.
Okay.
And then we can add, if Senator Scott wants to add additional information that's public, we can do that as a separate amendment. And if the motion fails, then we know we can take Senator Landon's road.
Okay, sounds fair enough to me. Go ahead and restate your motion.
Okay, so we would, page 3, line 1, basically delete after information, delete line 2, delete line 3 up to party affiliations, and then reinsert that the following sentence after the word confidential period on line 4. Names, gender, addresses, unique identifying numbers generated by the state, and party affiliations are
Do you want to
public
add
records.
precinct?
No, Mr.
Okay.
Chairman, I think let's keep this separate. This is,
Fair enough.
this is just a little bit of housekeeping to make it, easier to read. That's the purpose of the motion. We want to add something else, we can make a separate amendment. So
Fair enough.
that's the amendment.
Discussion? Anybody else? Call for the question. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Got to do one or the other. Got a no, got 2 ayes. All right, passed by a landslide. You guys have never been so timid about your votes. Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, I move we add precinct and voter district to the list that are public records.
Okay. Any discussion? Let's do Senator Boner and then Senator Barlow.
Hey, just a question for the clerks, is that going to, eh, would that add to your workload or anything like that? What would be the impact on your office?
I think they come by precinct already.
You already got that, so it's not an impact?
Yeah.
Okay, just making sure, okay. I can
It'd
support
be
that.
pretty hard to have a walking list if you didn't have a.
Right.
Senator Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we actually have now lists in 3 different places in statute. So I think we ought to at least try to use the same language. So on page 2, line 9, the verbiage is precinct and district numbers. I think Senator Scott used precinct and voter districts or
Would that
something.
be friendly, Senator Scott?
Page 2, line
Line 9,
9.
the
nine.
first 4 words.
Yeah, yep, that's the right language. isn't it?
Okay, let's make it the same. Thank you, Senator Barlow. Further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That's carried. Anything else on the bill?
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Scott.
let me suggest a new sentence on page 3, line 4 before the when necessary. So it'd be the last sentence before you go to when necessary.
So Senator Boner already put a sentence in there, but go ahead.
Yeah, and we're going to put a second sentence in there.
All right?
And it would read, personally identifiable information not listed in this subsection are not public records and shall be kept confidential.
Okay? We understand that? Ms. Langford?
And we'd have
Ms.
to,
Freese? You don't have to let her back in, but I think the clerks are good with that. Go back to you, Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, and then you take out that and other personally identified information in the other list. So you've got a
That
clear.
brings it home. Yep. Everybody agree? All right.
I think so.
All right, now you guys are going to have to help Ms. Russell, our Ms. Russell, Debbie Russell, with the report on the bill for sure. So we ready for the question? All those in favor of Senator Scott's last motion, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That's carried. Anything else on the bill?
Do pass.
Do pass on the bill? Debbie, would you call the roll?
Mr. Chairman.
Oh, sorry, I missed something.
No, Mr. Chairman, I need to make a comment.
Okay,
So-
Senator Barlow.
So we have registry list on page 2 as a definition in this bill, and that's being amended in the bill. And then we get to the bottom of page 2, we have a list of things that are some of them, anyway, a list of things. Then we go to page 3 of the bill, and we have an official registry list of information that it's in statute, and it has both required information and may information, shall and may information. And I'm just, Mr. Chairman, there is a lot of, to me, as I try to put them together, there's some inconsistencies. I wish we had one list and we referred to it back in these other sections, instead of having 3 different lists, which are not consistent in verbiage nor in its entirety. So, Mr. Chairman, I will support the bill going forward, but I do not, it seems like we may be actually, if we're not careful, we're creating other inconsistencies, because one is throughout the code, one is within this chapter, and one is to a different distribution. So I just throw that out there, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I think it's a good observation. Senator Boner?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, it's my understanding also that the registry list is a separate, it's literally a list that only certain people can access. So there is a little bit of a difference there. I'm not sure if it's appropriate or not. There's a difference between that list, which is identified in statute, and something that's just generally available that somebody could have with a public information request. So I just point out that there is a slight difference there, and maybe consistency is a good thing, maybe it's not, I'm not sure. But I just want to point out we're talking about 2 different things.
Thank you, Senator Boner. Anybody in the audience want to react to this? Mr. Secretary.
Mr. Chairman, maybe Mr. Rubino wants to weigh in on this. there are three lists that our office released. There's the registry list, the voter history file list, and the absentee history file request list. And as Senator Boner said, one of those is actually specifically laid out in statute, and that's why you have all this interacting, and that list is a snapshot in time, that registry list, and the statute also lays out who can access that list. Anything to add?
Mr. Rubino, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Joe Rubino, I'm the Policy Director and General Counsel for the Secretary of State. Yeah, I think the Secretary brings up a point that was raised by Senator Barlow and Senator Boner. And the registry list and enumerating those, what constitutes a registry list, that really is, it's the snapshot in time of registered voters in the state of Wyoming. The voter history file, the absentee history file, those pertain to the primary, the general elections. Those are made through a general public or a specific public records request made to our office or the county clerk's office. Now, I'll just point your attention to a couple of the operative terms that were subject to interpretation before this and for several election cycles. On page 2, line 16 of the engrossed version, unless otherwise specifically stated in this election code, all election records of the county clerk are public. So that was subject to interpretation about what was public record. And then you get into a separate issue with enumerating what is personally identifiable information. So that was the issue about enumerating what is and what is not. Now, the legislative history and the legislative intent about what happened in 2009 for the voter identification number really sheds light on what the intent was. And then the intent of this bill is to further enumerate that maybe if it's personally identifiable information, the voter identification number, that it's still public record. And that goes back to further clarification, statutory clarification on just because something may be personally identifiable information or it may not be, that it is put into statute that it is public record. And so that was, I think, the way that it was originally worded, although it was a complex sentence and you had a couple of negatives.
Yeah.
That was why it got into that. It was enumerating, although the catch-all was, unless specifically enumerated in this section, it is all election records are public records. Then you have the enumeration of certain personally identifiable information that is and that is not confidential. Does that make sense?
It does.
And so, I absolutely understand, and I was trying to track, I think, some of the amendments that were made to this. But yeah, the 22-113, first of all, just to take two steps back, the registry list, that is enumerated in statute, but the voter history file, the absentee history file, that's not. But 22-113 was relied upon in the interpretation of what was released as both confidential and not confidential. And so getting to Senator Boner and Senator Barlow's points there, that might explain some of the differences. The enumerated list for the registry list, that snapshot in time, may be a little bit different.
Thank you, Mr. Rubino. Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, question for the Secretary of State's office. The problem this bill was designed to fix was arguably a stupid attorney's interpretation previously. You've reversed that interpretation. If we were to simply kill this bill, would that solve all the problems?
Mr. Rubino, Mr. Secretary.
Mr. Chairman, we did reverse the previous secretary's interpretation, which conflicted with the interpretation of the clerks. We like the statutory guidance, as we talked about earlier, but now we've got a very complex amendment that may have changed the intent of the entire bill. I will say I wasn't able to track it. I can't confidently say I know what this bill currently does. So, where we're at now, I would have to look at, but, certainly if the amendments were largely reversed, I think the intent of the bill was to get to these two issues that had come up over the interim, and the committee wanted to clarify for the previous Secretary of State that these are to be released.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
So I suspect, though, that you're going to go take a look at those amendments.
Oh, yeah.
Mr. Rubino's tracking them in. We're open, we'd be open to working with you. If you reviewed those amendments and you thought, well, this is not good, we certainly would. But I think they do. I think they do capture what we're getting at. So down this way, Senator Scott, do you have anything more to add?
Well, my suggestion, Mr. Chairman, is going forward that we lay the bill back, get the amendment prepared in black and white so we can read it and they can read it. And then see if we want to modify it.
Committee-
And maybe Senator Barlow can pursue his idea as well.
I kind of like to get this bill out, but let's hear.
Mr. Chairman, certainly get this bill out. I just point out that, I'll just go to
Get up by your microphone, sir.
confusion, I mean, page 3, line 16, unique identifying number generated by the state. That's already actually in the current statute.
Yes.
Underneath, if you don't have a driver's license, you use this. Maybe that's what we wanted.
No, you're misunderstanding how that's used. You have to show some form of ID. It's not necessarily, to register to vote, you have to prove who you are. And then you get assigned this unique identifying deal. Senator Landon.
Just one final thought. Look, I was kind of leaning in the direction of the Secretary of State. I think let's take a look at this amendment. We've added a lot. More is better sometimes, not always. So let's get a look at the amendment. I think as we move along, if we discover that we've convoluted, we can always draw back. I like the idea of being a little simpler and just not enumerating what is and is not.
So are you supporting laying the bill back till Thursday? All right, without objection, the bill will be laid back till Thursday. We'll get the amendment prepared. Thank you very much. Next bill for our consideration is House Bill 47.
Mr. Chairman?
Senator, or Mr. Secretary,
We do have a meeting. Would appreciate if we could be high up on the list for testimony on this.
go ahead right now.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 47 provides codification of election equipment certification requirements for electronic voting systems. And as originally written, House Bill 47 conflicted with several of the requirements vendors needed to provide to ensure that election equipment was secure, as found in Chapter 12, Section 2, subsection B of the Wyoming Secretary of State's rules regarding election equipment certification. It actually did less than our current rules regarding what needed to be submitted and what the basis for denial was. These requirements included several important metrics, including technical specifications, history of use in other states, and any written complaints or concerns made to the vendor by other jurisdictions. However, after working with the House Corporations Committee, our office proposed several amendments to House Bill 47, bringing it in line with existing rules and regulations such that they will not conflict with this bill. So as amended, House Bill 47 is substantively a codification of existing Secretary of State rules, which was the original intent of the bill as sort of was laid out in the interim. And when we saw that difference between our rules and where they were going, we added that, and I think the clerks were okay with that. Certainly don't want to speak for them. But the main thing the clerks wanted from this bill, and I think the original ask, was putting in statute EAC certification, which we're certainly supportive of. And I want to be clear, there's no intent from our office to ever remove EAC certification from requirement for electronic voting machines. We just want to make sure this does not downgrade what is currently required in our rules. So would ask you to, that's the difference between, that's what was added in the engrossed copy. Now, one thing I want to say on this too is, again, going first is somewhat of a disadvantage. There was some concern put out there by some entities that maybe this was too much release from the electronic voting machine companies, and there was an amendment that failed on the House side to take out some of this language. And I want to be clear here. I mean, ES&S, our current voting machine system, actually reached out to us. They gave us an email of a number of lobbyists who were trying to kind of drum up, saying this is requiring them to release a lot of data that they shouldn't be. And they made clear to us that they didn't want anything removed from this. They think the way this read, the engrossed version, is fine. And this is not too much data. This is in the name of transparency. And so I want to make sure, I think there might be some, I'm not sure what's coming in terms of, but they made clear that they support the engrossed language and did not want to get involved in a fight about what's already in existing rule. So.
Questions for Mr. Secretary? Did they provide any information that you could share with us? Anything written?
Mr. Chairman, it was mostly verbal, and it was a communication from a lobbyist, I think, that wanted to be retained by them. And then they reached out to us, said, we think everything's fine, and they never did. It was a very odd communication to them. And I assume, and maybe in lobbyist world, sometimes that happens, but I just want to be clear, like there was some talk that I don't think is quite reality. And so I just wanted to give a little background here.
Yeah, but we kind of like to work on real facts and,
Yeah.
If somebody wants to testify before the committee and say that they support that, I'd love to have it, but it's kind of, I don't question you at all, of
Yeah.
course. But anyway, it's
Well-
not very solid.
Mr. Chairman, I would just note they're not here
Yeah,
to say
right.
that they don't. And trust me, I guess if they thought that they're, what they needed to release under this bill was somehow out of line, they've been tracking it and they would be here. So I would note that as a piece of evidence.
Fair enough.
Thank you.
Who's next? Senator Scott?
Chairman, you talked of EAC certification. Are you talking about, if you look on page 3, lines 1, 2, and 3, where it says proof that the electronic voting system has been certified by the United States Election Assistance Commission? Is that what you're talking about as EAC?
Mr. Secretary?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, that's the EAC. Yeah, that is an acronym in the election world. The EAC was created in HAVA to provide assistance to states, and states like Wyoming, a lot of states have staffs of 20, 30 people doing a lot of this certification. We don't have that, so we do rely on that assistance from the EAC. And I think the original intent of the bill, overall, the clerks wanted to codify EAC certification, but I just want to make sure we don't water down what we're doing and we have a thorough process, especially that process for receiving written complaints that we laid out in rules. So if we're going to codify it, let's do it right. And that was the intent of the amendments.
Thank you, sir. Anybody else? Anybody else? Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Thank
Good
you.
luck for the rest of your day. Let's hear from the clerks.
Mr. Chairman, Senators, Mary Langford again, representing the County Clerks Association. And as has already been stated, the county clerks support and would really appreciate the codification of the federal certification for our electronic voting systems. We feel that the codification of this portion of the rules only strengthens the security of Wyoming's election system and our integrity. I have some more testimony I could give you about EAC, but I think you're pretty well informed about that to save some time here. There are 38 states that are federally certified. Wyoming is one of them for their electronic equipment. This bill was amended in House corporations pretty extensively, and the Clerks Association has some comments on the House amendments and some proposed possible amendments to what happened there. And I'd like to hand off to Clerk Freeze. She has the information that goes with that. If we could bring her in, Mr. Chairman.
She's already in.
Morning,
Fremont
Mr.
County's everywhere. Ms. Freeze.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Julie Freese, Fremont County Clerk, and speaking for the Clerks Association. So on the House side, we didn't get to see any of the proposed amendments beforehand. and thinking that the rules were all fine. We were fine with that at the time. I have re-looked at those, and I have a couple of areas that I have some concerns with. So if we would go to page 6, lines 10 through 15. Upon written request of the Secretary of State, the vendor fails to submit the electronic voting system for re-examination by a voting system test laboratory certified by the United States Election Assistance Commission or National Institute of Standards and Technology. Obviously, they've already gone through that, and to be certified further, anytime they've changed anything, they do already have to go through that. Words like a request for re-examination is kind of problematic. It's kind of arbitrary. And so I don't know that this is something that we would support. Anything that would be arbitrary to potentially lose our systems. I want to remind everybody that even though we have a number of ways of getting our machines, we had to do a contract with the county. Those are the county's machines. So to be somewhere where we might lose them and really don't have a lot of say to them because it's in the statute, we're a little bit concerned about that one. So I don't know if you want to discuss that one first, or if you want me to go through all of my concerns.
By that one, did you mean lines 10 through 15?
Yes. I'm sorry, I don't know what I said. 10,
Yeah,
yeah,
on page 10 through 15 on page 6.
6.
Okay. So would you suggest that language be taken out of the bill?
I would think that would be best. We already say earlier that they do have to be EAC certified. And I did serve on the standards board. So every time they have something new that they want to bring forward or, upgrades, those have to go through the EAC and NIST testing before they can be sent out to the states.
Okay, and thank you, Ms. Freese. Questions for Ms. Freese? Senator Barlow?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So on that, Ms. Freese, would it give you any, or if you have a machine, and I think we're using machine in the Secretary of State's testimony and system as the same thing. It sounds like it's synonymous. System and a machine are the same thing. First of all, am I making an assumption incorrectly, or is that accurate? Thank you,
Ms. Freese?
So the system might be the entire package. So you've got like your area where you can code your ballots, and the area where you get your results back into, and then you have the machines. So it might be a little bit different.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So if we were going to make this more specific to the machine and not the system, would you be comfortable with striking Secretary of State and saying the clerk? If you had an issue with the machine, do you currently have, under your contractual arrangement with the vendor, do you have the ability to have a machine examined? That's the question I'm getting to. If you think there's a problem, do you have that ability? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Freese?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Barlow, I don't think that, so I think the word I'm having a problem with, just to be clear, is re-examination. Like, that's kind of arbitrary. And I don't think the county clerk, you've got 23 opinions there. So I don't think one county clerk, I don't want them to upset the entire state's voting system. I think I'm not so much opposed to this language. I just don't like the idea that the Secretary of State or a county clerk, any one of those people can say, I think there should be some re-examination of this because I'm not really sure if that voting system machine worked. You see what I'm saying? So re-examination is the word that I'm struggling with a little bit.
Mm-hmm. But Ms. Freese, does that whole entire paragraph add anything, even if you fix the re-examination word? I'm not sure that it does. But can I ask you another question?
Sure.
There's a similar directive paragraph on page 7, lines 6 through 9.
That's my next issue.
I didn't mean to steal your thunder. Lord knows, after 40 years of working this woman, I know she can thunder. Go ahead, Ms. Freese.
I'm trying not to be dramatic like I was the other day. Okay, so page 7, lines 6 through 12 is another place where I feel like words like problematic or failure to comply with any rule of the Secretary of State, and this is not anything against our current Secretary of State. I'm concerned that we give any Secretary of State the authority to come up with some problem or a word like problematic, that this is problematic to them, that suddenly it can upset the certification of our machines and lead to a decertification. And it takes a long time to get machines to a county and up and running for an election, first of all. So we want to be very careful about how we're allowing a easy decertification, I guess.
Okay, thank you. And did you have any, well, committee, any questions at this point? Did you have any other concerns?
Nope, those were the 3 areas, and actually the one was all together, so.
Okay. Ms. Langford, do you have anything to add?
Mr. Chairman, just one short comment. You realize that when we purchased the 2020 election equipment, that was purchased by federal money that was given to the state. The equipment was purchased, and then the ownership of that equipment was given to each of the counties. So each of the counties owns their own equipment and has their agreement with ES&S. The agreements are all identical, I believe, but anything that would interfere with that ownership or that statewide effort is concerning. And I think that's represented by Clerk Freese's comments.
Thank you, Ms. Langford. Anybody else? So I want to give a housekeeping. We will not get to the blockchain bill. We'll try to get to the next bill on the list, which is the tribal relations bill. So we're going to make best efforts to get there. It depends how this goes. Anybody else want to testify on this bill? Anybody from the audience? Ms. Simmons?
Gail Simmons, Civics 307. The original and intended intention of this bill was simply to provide with the county clerks with the statutory support that all of the systems have that federal election certification. So that was the original purpose of the bill, and the original language that was worked with the clerks actually covered that. So it covered them on the equipment that the counties own, and the system, which includes software, firmware, and hardware, just to be clear on the difference between machines and system. So when the Secretary of State's office came in with extensive amendments that codify the rules that they have, I think that's when it became problematic. So you, as the legislature, have provided the authority to the Secretary of State in the executive's office, in the executive branch, to set up rules using the rulemaking process. And so it was pointed out to the office at the time they added these that, do you really want to put this, codify this? And then any changes that you need to make have to be codified, or if you keep them rules, you simply need to go through the rules process. So my recommendation would be to go back to the original language. There is nothing the state could do that even has the capabilities of being more specific and more granular on certifying any voting system than already exists at the federal level. So this simply, in my mind, muddies the water. On a separate matter, one of the concerns that was being bandied around that the secretary mentioned was about access to software. That really is not in here because it doesn't require access to the software, which is proprietary. It's simply, when it was in the rules, it simply said that it had to be an escrow. So it's not like anybody else has access to that. But I strongly urge you to consider going back to the original, which was to provide the statutory cover to the county clerks that they must be federally election certified, and leave the rest of the language added in back to the rules. And I stand for questions.
Okay. Questions for Ms. Simmons? Questions for Ms. Simmons? Ms. Simmons, I'm looking at the amendment that the House offered, and help me, I'm a little bit confused. I'm not seeing the two sections that Ms. Freese pulled out. I'm seeing one of them, and I'm just missing it. And I'm seeing the one, the bottom of page 1 of the amendment. It's the upon written request by the Secretary of State, the vendor fails to submit. But I'm not seeing the other one. Am I missing something?
So there's two amendments, Chairman, through you. When in the House committee, the Secretary of State came with one amendment that had been drafted by the Deputy Secretary of State and one amendment that was drafted by the attorney and policy manager.
Right.
And they jumble it all together and put both in.
Yeah, and it says it's the standing committee amendment that I have. But it's funny, I'm not seeing part of this. And are you sure you're looking at the standing committee? The one online? Yeah. Hold on a sec. So tell me, Senator Barlow, give me that reference again. Which, is your microphone on, sir?
Mr. Chairman, one of the sites that the Ms. Freese talked about is on page 2 of the amendment, lines 12 through 14. That's the problematic language. that you
Oh,
spoke
there,
of.
I see it now. I was having a little dyslexic moment. I very apologize. Thank you very much. I was looking for the word Secretary of State, and it was buried in the second sentence. So thank you. So now I think it is definitely the standing committee amendment. It does get to what you're saying. And Ms. Simmons, you're saying that the bill would be better off without the standing committee amendment.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Do the clerks agree with that?
I don't have that in front of me. Maybe he does.
I think Ms. Langford does, Ms. Freese. Ms. Langford?
Mr. Chairman, I believe the part of the standing committee amendment is just the portions that Clerk Freese excluded, which is on page 1 of the standing committee amendment, starts at line 38.
Yep, I got that.
And then goes to page 2, starting on line 12.
But Ms. Langford, my question is, Ms. Simmons raising the point that the entirety of the standing committee amendment really doesn't add anything to the bill from the point of view of the clerks. I want to hear from you. Would we
Mr. Chairman,
better-
I think we're fine with all of the rest of that.
Okay,
It's just right out of the rules. It's just codification of the rules.
okay. Thank you very much. Anybody else? Ms. Simmons, thank you for that. Let's hear from other people. Who else would like to address the deal? Mr. Secretary?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I've been listening a little bit and
I'll
just
bet.
wanted to come back. Yeah, I guess, I guess the language that some of the clerks have an issue with is page 6, lines 10 through 15, correct?
Let me get to the bill. I was working off something
Okay.
else. Yes, sir.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I really would ask you, what is the intent of this bill? I think it's to provide a election confidence and have that process in place. This is the exact same as in our rule currently. And in terms of EAC certification and statute, I don't think was ever any question that EAC certification would be required. So I think if we're going to codify this, we should have the same process, or at least as strong of a process as there currently is in our rule. And I would just ask you, what message does that send to the voter that we can't, in response to complaints, or we would be taking out that section that would allow us to respond to that and say, look, we need to have a reexamination of your situation. So I'd push back a little bit. I don't think this is a big deal to have this in there, and it's really just the current process that is in place. And I think it's important for voter confidence. I think there were already questions about about this bill. It was a close vote over in the House, and I really think we should keep it in, so.
Well, thank
Yeah.
you, Mr. Secretary. And I would point out that they also suggest removing lines 6 through 9 on page 7. And that is the electronic voting system vendor or its employees are found by the Secretary of State to be problematic. So they're suggesting removing those 2 paragraphs.
And Mr. Chairman, I mean, I guess,
Same thing, kind of, right?
yeah, I think it's the same thing. And I did print out copies of our rules, so you can see it's
Sure.
an exact same copy. Do you want a copy? of
Sure,
that?
that'd be great. Thank you
Yeah,
very
thank
much.
you.
Okay. Any questions for the Secretary from the committee? Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Thanks for the copy of the rules. Oh, Senator Barlow.
Mr. Chairman, so I did have a question regarding the complaints, and I'm sorry, I'm trying to get to the right spot. Receiving complaints, and it talks about jurisdictions. My assumption with that is Wyoming jurisdictions, not the entire universe. Is that accurate, Mr. Chairman?
Could you, I'm not sure I followed your question. Jurisdiction,
Mr. Chairman, within the new language that was brought in as a standing committee amendment in the House, there is the ability for the Secretary of State to review complaints, and I'm sorry, I'm not finding it fast enough. And it talks about jurisdictions.
are you on page
Yep,
where it says county or local jurisdiction explaining why the
right,
denial?
page 5, top of page 5, I guess, start at the bottom of page 4, a list of written complaints or concerns made to the vendor by other jurisdictions, including county and local. And so my question is to the Secretary of State is, are we talking about Wyoming jurisdictions or the entire known universe? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Secretary. you
Mr.
get the
Chairman,
question? Yeah.
Senator Barlow, no, I interpreted that, and I think the rules, the same wording, that's other jurisdictions across.
The country.
Yeah, exactly.
Where
And
these machines would be
that's I think a pivotal addition, we're a pretty small sample size and we want to take in those complaints from other states of what might be occurring.
That's the way I read it too, sir.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Thank you very much, Ms. Secretary. You're getting your exercise today. Yeah. All right, who else would like to address the committee? Ms. Russell?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In terms of integrity and security, the Secretary of State is the point person for the state, and so receives reports from various communities. And given that we have multiple emplacements of this voting equipment across the state, if something's found in one county, that would allow the Secretary of State to say, we have a problem here. We need to look at this. Is this shared across the other counties? Which would require, because there is an initial examination, it does require a re-examination. And so I'm not sure what the issues are, but I think we can't hamstring the Secretary of State. There are a very limited number of vendors who provide these systems as a whole. And so obviously, identification of problems comes from other jurisdictions. I would just urge that be kept in mind and keep the Secretary of State whole with the power that they need to act when there are problems.
Thank you, Ms. Russell. Questions from Ms. Russell? Thank you very much. Who else would like to address the committee? Anybody else? Anybody online? Anybody online, Kelly? All right. I think we've heard the public testimony. Committee, what's your pleasure? What's your pleasure on the bill? Got a motion by Boner. Discussion. Senator Scott, anybody?
Chairman, I'll move we delete the sections that
That the clerks wished?
the county clerks objected to.
Would you want to do them both together? Be more
Yeah.
efficient? All right. So the motion is on page 6, lines 10 through 15, strike from the bill, and lines, page 7, lines 6 through 9. Discussion.
Page 7, was it 6, on page 7, was it 6 through 9?
Yes, sir.
Or 6 through 12
Are you on the right page?
on page 7?
Oh, okay. 6 through 12. Thank you.
Mr.
Do I have that
Chairman,
right, Ms. Langford? Thank you. All right, thank you. Go ahead, Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, I think the clerks are nervous about some kind of an excitement decertifying their equipment just for an election and impinging on their ability to hold the election.
I think so too, Senator Scott. Any further discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No. Got one no, the rest ayes. The motion is carried. Back on the bill. Anything else on the bill? Call the roll, Debbie, please. Senator Ellis, might as well get in position. Thank you. Bring your team.
Senator Barlow? Oh,
Keep going, Ms. Russell. Debbie Russell.
Senator Barlow? Senator Boner?
Aye.
Senator Landon? Senator Scott?
Aye.
Mr. Chairman?
Aye. So the bill is passed with amendment. Thank you very much. The next bill for our consideration is, I got too many tabs in my notebook now. Senate File 18. Senator Ellis, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I bring to you House Bill 18. This is a product of the Select
House
Committee.
Bill 18, sorry.
That's okay. Select Committee on Tribal Relations. Senators, you might recall several years ago, we discussed at length the epidemic of missing and murdered Indigenous people. And at the time, we were looking at ways of improving our response to missing people in general. And it came to our attention that although the state of Wyoming had been engaged in using Amber Alerts, which are targeted toward children, we learned there was nothing in our statutes that codified the practice. Really, it happened in the mid-2000s because one of our neighboring states of Utah issued an Amber Alert, and we were able to recover the child successfully in Wyoming. But it really highlighted the need to have these alert systems in place. So the Amber Alert's a critical tool that law enforcement agencies used. We learned that the Department of Homeland Security actually holds the contract with our federal partners, but it's the Wyoming Highway Patrol that administers the program. So in that bill that we passed addressing missing and murdered Indigenous people, we required and made it necessary for the Department of Homeland Security to work with our tribes to ensure that Amber Alert systems were in place statewide and that we would never revoke those unless through legislative action. This last interim, we became aware of another alert system that has been adopted by a number of states called the Ashanti Alert. And this really fills the gap between those who are, not children over the age of 17 or 18, all the way up until their adult years. And so through the interim, we heard a testimony about the effectiveness of the Ashanti Alert system with the goal of recovering people who go missing rather quickly. And you might be aware, on television, you see this all the time. People say, I can't report my loved one missing. They haven't been gone 24 hours. That is a fallacy. There is no requirement that someone be missing for 24 hours before requesting law enforcement to intervene. Alert systems are not perfect, but they are an incredibly helpful tool. If you look at how they work with children in particular, the first 3 hours that a child goes missing are the most critical for recovery. So the program's already in place. So what this bill would do, Mr. Chairman, would simply be to expand that to cover those additional vulnerable adults, including those people who are endangered, but not necessarily because of a third party or a secondary party, but because of themselves. So you'll hear testimony today about individuals who have dementia and other wandering episodes and how this could be used to really hopefully bring them home safe. So I know we're short on time. I could go on, but I'm happy to walk you through the bill. You'll see on page 1, this would amend the duties of Homeland Security. As I mentioned, this is the department that has the contract with the federal agency. On to page 3, this talks about the duties of the Wyoming Highway Patrol. And the language is pretty straightforward, just assisting local, state, tribal, and federal law enforcement agencies to integrate additional missing person alert systems. Going on to page 4, you'll see some conforming language. When we looked at the issue of missing people several years ago, we became aware that tribes also have the ability to implement their own Amber Alert type systems in response to a horrible incident that happened on the Navajo reservation. So this was a catch-all language that recognizes if our tribes wanted to implement their own alert system, that we would cooperate with them just as we do with another state. But if they don't have that system in place, we want to make sure that the reservation's covered. So the language we worked on years ago required our state agencies to develop an MOU with law enforcement at Wind River. So this is really just conforming language, kind of recognizing that that structure's in place. And then on to page 5, this is, we just add a definition of what an adult at risk means. This would be a person who has developmental disability, who suffers from Alzheimer's disease or dementia, or who suffers from, or could, without access to their medication, suffer from cognitive impairment, if the impairment would likely render the adult incapable of getting to a familiar location without assistance. The chairman of our Good Here Corporations Committee serves on the Tribal Relations Committee, is very knowledgeable about this issue as well. One issue we did discuss in the interim is, do we need to codify this in statute? And so there was some back and forth about whether or not the Department of Homeland Security and the Wyoming Highway Patrol would implement this. I think we heard resoundingly that they were supportive of these efforts, that they would move forward and actually start implementing this regardless of whether or not we had a bill. However, my concern remains that, just because we have the cooperation of these individuals today doesn't necessarily mean that we'll have that in the future. So if we have a future governor who maybe doesn't see the value of this, they could just pull the program and it would be done. Mr. Chairman, so that's why the bill is before you. I think this is an important enough issue that if our federal or our state agencies wanted to repeal this, that it would warrant a conversation with the legislature and we can be involved in that decision. So that's the bill before you, and happy to answer any questions. And I've got Ms. Chambers, who has been doing a lot of work with our human trafficking task force, as well as our missing and murdered Indigenous person task force.
Thank you, Senator Ellis. Questions for Senator? Ms. Chambers, do you want to go ahead, and then we'll hear from the governor's office, I think.
Chairman Case, I'm fine. In light of time, you've heard from me already. I'm just here in case there were any questions specific to the task force.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Let's hear from the governor's office. I'm sure he's going to be strongly against, I would guess. That would be my. Mr. Wetland, good to see you.
Chairman Case, good to see you as well. Members of the committee, good morning. I'm Kit Wentland, the Governor's Special Counsel and Tribal Relations Policy Advisor. Just here to reiterate what Senator Ellis has said. The Governor's office stands behind this bill. There's an administrative lift and there's the statutory lift. We support the statutory lift. And on the administrative side, the Governor's office, Wyoming Highway Patrol, and the Office of Homeland Security have all been working towards implementing the Ashauni Alert now. Session has kind of slowed us down, but really we're at the stage where we're hoping it's implemented in the state by February. And at that stage, local law enforcement agencies will be able to submit a prescribed form if an alert meets an established set of criteria. That way we make sure there's not too many alerts. It's a pretty strict criteria that's almost identical to an Amber Alert, except it deals with adults, not children. And once that happens, then Highway Patrol verifies the request, fits that criteria set, and then they determine whether to initiate the alert through the iPause system. And that's the system that sends it out to a cell phone or to those different kinds of broadcasting methods. Long and short, we should be on track to administratively have this alert operational this month or at latest early next month. And we think it's a valuable addition to help track down these missing, to try and stop these cases at their inception before they start. Because really the longer time goes, even if it's 24 hours, the harder and harder it is to recover folks, especially with how it impacts Indigenous communities on and off the reservation. And with that, I'd happily stand for any other questions, Mr.
Thank you, Mr. Wetland. Questions for Mr. Wetland? Thank you very much. Give our best to His Excellency. And let's hear from the Northern Arapaho tribe. There, I'm sorry, Mr. McNiven, I didn't see you behind the post.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Travis McNiven on behalf of the Northern Arapaho Business Council. In light of time and previous testimony, certainly stand behind the work of the Tribal Relations Committee over the interim and support the bill. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Questions for Mr. McNiven? Thank you. Anybody else would like to testify? Come on up and make them quick. We are kind of at the 10-minute mark. Now I feel a lot better because I wondered why the Highway Patrol was here all morning. I really did. Come on, everybody get in seats, and Me Too testimony is good too, but let's start with the uniformed officer. I had wonder, well, why is he here? Wouldn't I know if the Highway Patrol was supposed to be here? Sir, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Senators. Carl Germain, Major, Wyoming Highway Patrol, Support Services. And just wanted to take a brief moment to say that we do support this House Bill 18, and policies in place, and we have that alert form ready to go, and we will work with Homeland Security and the governor's office to hopefully have it implemented prior to the end of this month. And that's what I would like to say. I'm here for any questions if needed.
Thank you, Major. Questions? Any questions? That was always my concern when we first started doing a bill, is that we could do this already and we could have done it last year. I'm really glad we're doing it now. And I appreciate the way you're actually doing it before the bill probably is effective. That's great. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Ann Clement. I'm here on behalf of the Wyoming chapter of the Alzheimer's Association. I just wanted to highlight a little bit of the importance of this for those living with Alzheimer's disease and related dementia in our state. There are about 10,000 Wyomingites living with dementia. About 60% of them will be prone to wandering. And if during one of those wandering episodes they're not found in the first 24 hours, only 5% of them are likely to make it home unharmed on their own safely. If they're not located in that first 24 hours, they're also likely to be found deceased. So with dementia and related diseases, there are some concerns as it pertains to their ability to just locate themselves safely in a wandering episode, but also the dangers that go along with their visual integration and cues is diminished. So their peripheral vision is deteriorated, their ability to detect depth perception is also deteriorated, so they're more likely to be harmed. So we sincerely appreciate the committee's consideration of this proposal as it moves forward. Thank you.
And not to mention our horrible weather sometimes. Yeah.
To that point, Mr. Chairman, a wandering episode can include those kinds of concerns where they've left the house not even in the appropriate clothing for the weather. So it really just is kind of an escalating issue. Thank
Yes.
you.
Thank you. Senator Barlow.
I was just noting to Ms. Clement that I still wear my Alzheimer's bracelet from an event they did in Gillette this past summer. So stuck with me, the challenges that these families have and the stories that I heard that day. So, yeah, Mr. Chairman.
So my story is that the reason that you have self-abuse and neglect in Wyoming law is because there was a woman that would, in the middle of winter, would come down in her pajamas to the restaurant, and the community and DFS couldn't do anything about it because it was self-abuse. So thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much for what you're doing. Mr. Morris, welcome.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you for allowing me to speak here today. My name is Don Morris. I'm a volunteer for ARP Wyoming, their government relations team. We are very much in favor of this bill. It expands the definition of missing persons to include developmentally disabled, also seniors with dementia, as has been mentioned, and allows the Highway Patrol to work with the tribes to expand this alert system to their area if they so choose. Also, there's no cost to this bill. Finally, there are two principles of government, I think, which are very important here. One, the bill has asked people to go beyond themselves and be aware of these things if they're on the highway and they're doing business. And that's very important. I mean, it's requesting help from citizens, and I think that's a very important principle. Secondly, basic social contract, which is that the government is here to protect our life, liberty, and property. This involves lives. So we're on and for this bill, and we hope that you'll vote for it. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Questions for Mr. Morris? Thank you, sir. Who else would like to testify? Need you to clear those chairs out and we'll bring in the next wave. Ms. Herman. And does anybody else need to testify on this? Okay.
Mr. Chairman, committee, thank you. My name is.
I'm not hearing you very well. Can you pull it close?
Committee and Mr. Chairman, thank you. My name is Marguerite Herman. For the League of Women Voters, our league, we have 5 local leagues, one in Fremont County, and they brought this issue as a top priority to the state league, and we adopted it as such. So standing in support of it, and I can't tell you anything more than you've already heard testimony. So I'll just end it there with saying it is one of our top priorities for this session. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Herman. Questions for Ms. Herman? Thank you, Ms. Herman. Kelly, we got anybody online? Nobody online? Anybody else? Last chance? Okay, committee, you've heard testimony. What's your pleasure? I heard it like from 5 people at the same time, but I'll give it to Landon. Discussion? Any proposed amendments? Ms. Russell, would you call the roll?
Senator Barlow? Senator Boner? Senator Landon? Senator Scott? Mr. Chairman?
Aye, 5 ayes. That one's an easy report. I'll take care of that one. All right, thank you all for testifying. Thank you, Senator Ellis, for your good work and good work on the Tribal Relations Committee. Appreciate it very much. The blockchain bill will be up, probably the second bill up on Thursday, so. And we will hear the carried over bill first. And we look forward to your amendment. Okay, let's get to work.
I think that amendment worked, you guys.
I do too.